in this episode.
Are you of the belief that there's a number of bullets in an arm, or are you of the belief that I can throw as much as I want?
But I look at the arm like a bridge. If all you're doing is tracking the cars going over the bridge with pitch counts, you don't know how strong the bridge is. If internal rotation is the north side, external is the south, scaption and grip are all the scaffolding and everything that holds bridges up. Again, I'm not an engineer, but whatever all those little bars are underneath the bridge, if something on that's weak, it doesn't matter how many cars you drive over, it's going to break. But if that bridge is strong enough to handle it, it's going to be able to take more cars over it. So that's my whole thing, is we need to make sure the structure is sound enough, because your first line of defense is going to be your muscle. Your second line is your connective tissue, and then your third, it's bone. And that's why when you see younger kids, they have, what are they called, avulsion fractures, where that whole bone rips off the elbow. I've seen guys that we've looked at in the draft room that have thrown and just their arm breaks in half on throws because the bone is just not developed. But if we make sure the muscle is strong enough, then the connective tissue is not going to take as much force. If the muscles are protecting the connective tissues can then protect the bone.
I first off, before you go, I'm going to steal that. All right, that bridge has now been stolen for sure. That story, that's amazing.
What is up, everybody? Welcome back to another edition of The Closing Pitch. My name is Spiker Helms, and this is a show about people, culture, and how to create a winning lifestyle. We have a special guest today. This is going to be mostly on baseball. We are big into the baseball season right now.
I feel like it's week 6 already. It's only week 2.
It's been unbelievable, and it's kind of crazy because Dave and I are actually back in the saddle. We're back in the dugout. And when we started this thing, we actually started it similarly, where we were launching into a season and we literally had no sleep. I remember Gavin Oswald coming up to us and saying, "Hey, what do you guys do when you guys are done with coaching us? Like, you guys just hang out?"
We work, Gavin.
Yeah, we work
all day long.
Yeah. Our fun time is when we're out on the field. So anyways, we have Jordan Oseguera from the Arm Care app. I am super excited about this. We've been creating TikToks for our Tigers account. And one of our TikToks, Jordan, got a lot of views, and it was basically very controversial. I think some of the information might be wrong, so I'm first to admit on it. And I want to literally bring it to you and say, yeah, you're totally right. Or yeah, you need to literally trash that TikTok and make a new one. So the idea of the TikTok was, how do you recover faster? And I want to get into that here in a little bit. But first off, give the audience a little bit of background on who you are and how you've gotten to this point. And then I want to talk about the Arm Care app, because when you just say that, people kind of like, oh, it's an app, but it's actually really cool. It's pretty purposeful, and it could potentially impact a player's career in a really positive direction, especially at the youth level. So go ahead and give us your background, and then we'll go from there.
Yeah. So my name is Jordan Oseguera, Director of Performance and Pitching, whatever that means. I don't know with Arm Care, but my background is I'm a pitching coach. I played in all the prestigious leagues out in Mexico and everywhere you don't want to go to play baseball professionally, pretty much. So I grinded through those. And then from that point, I was able to mentor and do some intern work under Tom House I've known him since I was about 7 or 8. Growing up in Salt Lake, he was always coming out. For whatever reason, he took a liking to me. So I was really fortunate to kind of learn under one of the pioneers of, research and information in baseball. Controversial as well, but an awesome guy, always willing to admit when he's wrong, just like your TikTok. I haven't even seen it yet, but, we'll just say willing to admit we're wrong. But going from there, I was able to get into coaching in collegiate baseball at my alma mater at Vanguard University. If you're going to go anywhere, you might as well go there. Probably the best university on the face of the earth. When it comes to baseball and development, but we kind of were brought in to kind of build a culture in that program because they weren't known for pumping out high character guys. So Rob Pegg, the head coach there, and myself were kind of tasked with, hey, let's revamp this. And, we got some better guys coming out of there, and we started winning a lot of games as well. So during my time there, 6 years, we had 1 World Series appearance, 4 regionals, and 1 conference tournament. So we had a good little run. They were one game away from the World Series again this year. They got knocked out, but they keep making that progress. And then from that point, I was able to get into coaching in professional baseball, and I did that for about 6 years with the Angels. Multitude of roles from assistant programs coordinator to pitching analyst to rookie ball coach, high A coach. Helped in the big leagues. Worked with Otani, Skaggs, who's no longer with us, Heaney, Justin Anderson, a lot of different guys through those opportunities through that. During that time, we did a ton with dynamometry. You talk about arm care, things like that, and dynamometry is just a fancy way to say strength tester. And at that same time, Crossover Symmetry, who's the same company as arm care, was developing their own dynamometry system. And when me and Ryan Croton were going, hey, you know what, we're kind of thinking about leaving pro ball, young kids, pro ball's not necessarily the greatest thing when you have, at the time, a 6-month-old. So we were looking for something a little bit different. And, Crossover goes, nobody knows what this is. No one knows how to use this stuff. You guys have been doing it. Can you help us do it? So we kind of jumped in, head first into the deep end of the pool, and it's been good. I mean, when we started off, Arm Care had about 500 users, and it was just like, hey, here's some strength numbers and a little bit of training. And now that we've kind of helped kind of revamp and tool some stuff in, we have 6 different measures. It's giving you, feedback on how much you should throw, giving you more detailed instruction on what you should be doing for a strength aspect of it. And I don't want to get too ahead of the questions, but that's kind of the 30,000-foot view of the quick summary elevator pitch of how I got to be with Arm Care.
And how long has Arm Care been around? Like when did you guys found it?
So me and Ryan came on a little bit after it got out of beta testing, and we're at almost the 2-year mark of Arm Care, and me and Ryan have been here for a little over a year. So they were in beta testing for about 10 months, I believe, somewhere in there. And then prior to that, they had some other systems that weren't Arm Care per se, but they had been messing and toying with a few other things. But officially as Arm Care, I want to say about 2 years.
And so it's pretty much it's getting battle tested. Like you have a number of users that are using the app, and you guys are getting immediate feedback. Now, are you using that data to really relay, like, hey, this is what's working, this is what's not working?
So what we did was, I got lucky, was starting in about, I missed this in my origin story, or whatever they say these days. I don't keep up with movies anymore. But at about 2006, 2007, when I was working for Tom in the NPA, we were really doing a ton of work with old dynamometry, very, very archaic considering what there is now. We were doing some things with about 3 or 4 different organizations. I can't publicly say which organizations they were just because of contractual, whatever they're called. I don't have a very good lawyer, so I'm not going to go into it. But long story short, we were tracking a bunch of information with that. So that's kind of where that genesis of Arm Care information happened. And then everything that Ryan and I did in Pro Bowl, we kind of took some of that information. So then we're kind of layering that into this system. It's not what we did with those pro teams, because we didn't necessarily like everything that was going on there with the way it was being used. So me and Ryan kind of took our spin on that data that's getting taken from the Arm Care information. And number 1, it needs to be usable. Number 2, it has to have something you can make actionable, and it has to be understandable, whether it's a 12-year-old or a 45-year-old pitching in the big leagues. And we have a huge range of ages using the system. Man, I think we started with about 500 players. We have, at the time of this recording, we're right about the 7,000 mark, give or take, above or below. So we've really skyrocketed on the users, and it's purely because we're making a usable system that's understandable, again, whether you're 12 years old or whether you're 45.
Well, we're kind of in a paradox too, because we have pitchers, double-digit pitchers that are throwing triple digits, and then we also have a problem with youth pitchers that are getting surgeries, and it's the best times, but also the worst of times. What is the explanation of? Yeah, your Arm Care is great, but bro, I want to throw hundo. How do I throw a hundo?
And this is something that Ryan and myself, we talk probably more than we realistically should, given that we're not even coaching on the same field anymore. We're obviously working in the same company, but it's something that we're always on the phone, we're always on a Zoom meeting, whatever it may be, and we're going over. It's not that hard to get guys to throw hard anymore. It's not difficult. It's not a tough task. It used to be, well, you can't teach velocity, so everybody would just draft for it. But now people are starting to realize there's so much information with sports science and performance and player development that you can add velo to a guy. And that's why we're seeing so many hard throwers. But now the difficult thing is, and I'll probably get some hate about this, but we're taking an old viewpoint from when everyone at the highest level was throwing 88 to 92 miles an hour, and we're still trying to take that piece and fit it into today's modern puzzle. So everyone's throwing harder. I mean, when I was coaching in rookie ball, we were the slowest throwing rookie ball team in the Arizona League. And I think our average velo was like 93.5, for a right-handed pitcher. So the guys are just throwing harder. I have 3 guys on the high school team I coach currently. I went back to coach in high school because, it's good to kind of refresh and get back and understand that different era of player coming up to be able to communicate with them. But I had 3 guys on that staff that were all underclassmen throwing in the low to mid 80s. So getting velocity is not a difficult task, but staying healthy is. And I know it's kind of a little off topic of what you asked me, but we're taking a pitch count solution to a problem that is not pitch count oriented. It's a piece of the puzzle, but if it was as big of a piece of a puzzle as everyone says it is, we would see injuries decline. But instead, we're seeing injuries increase because we're throwing harder. We have more access to information than we ever have, but nobody wants to actually determine what arm care actually is.
We're seeing more injuries. We're seeing more injuries during training, which is
exactly
back in my day. We didn't see that. It was literally let's see what happens the first 2 weeks. Let's see what injuries we get.
No,
and now it's in training. It's that guy went down in training. That's kind of weird. So it just seems like we're getting more of that.
Yeah, and that's something that Ryan points out a lot too. Is you're seeing a huge spike in injuries in training, practice, specifically in bullpens with throwing athletes, where it used to be in game. You used to have all the videos of the guy throwing, grabbing his arm, he's out for the season, and now you don't ever get there because someone's been scratched from the start because something went wrong. And what we're finding is that it's a 36-time higher likelihood of injury when someone's practicing or competing while fatigued. And that's in a nutshell what we're doing with arm care is we're tracking that fatigue. We're staying ahead of it. And it's something when we implemented that with the Angels is, I was in charge of monitoring all those pitchers' fatigue. We went from the most injured team to about middle of the pack just by monitoring our strength, by paying attention when a player's getting fatigued. Instead of having them throw that 95, 100 pitches or 5 and 75, let's dial back. So that way we can actually get the gas tank back to a full tank.
Fatigue's an interesting word. When you mean fatigue, do you mean arm fatigue? Do you mean body fatigue? Do you mean we're not getting enough sleep? What is it that you mean by when you say he's fatigued?
So it can be a combo of everything. And one of my favorite sayings is sometimes you're going to have to learn to go to work with a headache. So I'm going to scrap sleep because there's only so much we can do about that. From a professional setting, from even a collegiate setting. You might have a crappy flight. You might have a bus breakdown. You might have, you go to the Instagram minor league grinders. You might be staying in some random town where there's a quinceañera going on in your hotel lobby. You're not going to be able to change it. You're just not going to get any sleep. It is what it is. Not everything is 5-star major league hotels. But when it comes down to it, if you're monitoring just shoulder strength, that's going to be a very deep insight to what most of your body's doing. It's the end of the chain. A lot of people look at jump power, grip strength, a whole bunch of other things, but you can get a really good insight into how the whole body's recovering for a throwing athlete. I'm not talking about anything else. I don't know anything about anything else, just throwing athletes, about how that shoulder's recovering. And that's why we put so much emphasis on that shoulder. So for us specifically, that's the kind of the first piece of the puzzle. And then with the arm care, we actually have a fatigue rating. And what we would do is before we throw, we do a fresh exam. We find out where that arm is on the day, whether we need to adjust our throwing. And then afterwards, we can do a post-exam to find out how taxing that event was. And what we started finding, and all this information's in the system, is on a heavy throw day, whether it's a game day, a bullpen day, if you're a weighted ball guy, whether you love them, hate them, we want to make sure guys are doing them correctly. It's going to tell you how taxing that was. And what we found, tracking guys longitudinally over a long period of time, the guys who stayed healthy would lose no more than that 8 to 12% strength, ideally about 10%, because that's going to let you get back to that full strength. I believe the word supracompensation. I'm not an English guy. That's why I usually have to have Ryan fix my my typos whenever I say stuff, but we want to make sure we're getting back above that neutral point when we're back on that 5-day or 7-day rotation. If you're losing in that 12 to 15% strength on a regular basis, that's when you start seeing guys with dead arm, lat strains, biceps tendonitis. And then if you start getting into that 20% strength loss, that's when you start seeing surgeries. So for us, fatigue is multifaceted. Number one, it's where are you at today? But then if you're recovered, also how taxing was that particular event? So a good way I like to describe it is if you get in there and you throw 45 pounds on the bar and you get in there and squat and you're a new weightlifter, that might be way too much for you and you actually injure yourself on the first day of training. For other guys, it might not be enough and you need to add more weight on. So that way you're constantly taxing the muscles appropriately to where you're building strength over the course of a time. Because if you're not taxing the muscles and you're not actually causing that super compensation, you end up getting weaker over time. And that's where you see at the beginning of the year, you pointed out like, hey, we're going to wait 2 weeks. Let's see who's on the IL. Those first 2 weeks is usually the guys that aren't prepared. Those are the ones that come into spring training, the beginning of the season, they go on the shelf early. And then you have your second highest instance, which is typically right after an all-star break. I believe it's the second or third highest instance. I'm going to flop these around. We'll have Ryan leave something in your guys' show notes or something to fix my screw-ups. But then you have right around that all-star break is usually when that fatigue kicks in. And then right before the end of the season, you see another big spike in injuries because that's when guys they're not staying on top of things and they're getting weaker over time. So we also were paying attention, and I know I'm rambling, I apologize, but when guys were increasing their shoulder strength over the course of the season, roughly about a 5% strength gain over the course of the season, those guys didn't get released because number one, they were performing well. They were usually doing enough to hang around a level. If they got about 8% better, they usually bumped one level. If they got 10 or more percent better, they usually jumped 2 levels over the course of a year. And that's tracking it from a development standpoint. They were throwing harder, they were recovering faster, and they were throwing more strikes consistently. Because fatigue is a number one indicator of whether someone's going to start getting wild or not as well. So I know I got very long-winded there, and
it's huge.
It was a perfect answer. The big thing my follow-up question on that is the athletes that you studied, were those guys in the weight room? Were those guys running miles? Were those guys running pulls? Were they doing basically a body weight workout? Like, what were they doing that made them recover a little bit faster, or being able to protect that shoulder?
So that's one of the cool things that's really unique is the arm care system. And this is something I've implemented at the high school I'm coaching at out here in Salt Lake is we've taken it, we've started implementing it to find out what makes a player recover quicker. I have a small roster. I had 18 total guys, period, in my entire group last year, and only 2 of them had ever pitched before. So I have no room for a guy missing a start. So we would start implementing day 1. We would do their tests and find out where they're at. I want my guys recovered by day 3 at the high school level. In pro ball, we're looking day 2. And what I'm pulling that from was when you could get guys back to full strength or above that average strength that they're at by day 2 at the pro ball level. In the major leagues, it was a 2-game swing on their record. So instead of being 10-10, you're 12-8. That's the difference between about, league minimum and about $2.5 million a year. So that's how important it is to understand what recovery modalities work for you. So, I'm not as big of a proponent of long distance running as I used to be. I used to be a freaking track star, and I don't think it really did me a whole lot of good now that I'm digging into the actual data with it. I'm more into harder long sprints now because when you start seeing the hormones and everything it is that releases when you're pushing your body to the point of just close to puking, most people don't want to get there, but that's releasing growth hormone, testosterone, everything that's good for your tendons, ligaments, muscles, bones. I don't know, a lot of kids get long hair now. Helps your hair grow faster too. So why not, just pump all this natural hormone into your system and then combine that with a positive strength system. And like the Arm Care app is going to give you those basics of what you need. But when you can combine that with a really good strength coach, somebody who knows what they're doing, whether you want to do body weight, whether you want to do more ballistics, plyometrics, that's the thing. There's not a best answer for everybody. But the Arm Care system lets you go, oh, this is what works for me. I'm gaining strength continually each week. Or turns out I'm not doing well. I need to adjust what it is I'm doing on my own. It gives you the ability to assess whether you're going in the right direction or not. You don't just get into the car and go, I'm going to drive out to Boston and just start driving east from where I'm at because I'm going to end up in Florida somewhere if I just drive straight east. I need to be able to adjust and course correct. I did a little too much here. It's like tuning the dials on your radio. Need a little more treble, less bass, put it more in the front, switch this one to the back. So it gives you that ability to adjust your dials.
Well, it's the opposite of what kids think. I've always done with my pitchers. It's called the gauntlet workout. So after a start the next day, it's literally a taxing of the body. Now I don't know if that's right. You can tell me if I'm wrong or not. But it's literally an hour and a half workout of just pure mayhem where it's all body weights. There's no weights involved. It's all med ball work. They have sprints. They have side shuffles. They have a mile run for time. And then at the end of it, they have 2 easy laps around the field. It just seems like that once you're able to get that body to a point where it's exhausted the next day, it's just like you said, it seems like their body it's like a catch up. It's like a restart button for them. And then they're like, and they start drinking more water. And next thing you know, they're like, man, Spike, I feel really good today. I think I can go out there and throw another 7.
Yeah. And that's the big thing is people, specifically youth athletics, they're so undertrained that almost anything's going to help them. Almost anything, not anything. But most of them are so undertrained that they usually go, well, I pitched today, so that means I shouldn't do anything again until the next time I pitch. So that was one of the biggest mindsets for me going back into youth baseball. Was I would get these guys training, and it goes, okay, you just pitched on, we'll say it was a Monday. That means Thursday we're going to throw another bullpen if your body's recovered. And they go, what do you mean I'm throwing a bullpen? I don't want to waste all my bullets before the next game. It's like, dude, you have to practice. If all you do is you play, don't expect to get better. We need to practice and improve. So that's one of the big things is people don't understand how important in-season conditioning is. Most people look at this and go, you stop training in season. That's still a mindset that's gotten better in baseball, but it still has a lot of resistance. But when you go to the highest levels, you go to the really good performing college programs, they're training in season. Granted, they don't have as many two-way players, but they're still training in season. And you need to get in there, you need to work, you need to build that super compensation because that's going to, number one, it's going to help bulletproof you. If you understand how your body's responding to that, it's going to help you be more bulletproof. Number two, it's going to build endurance. Usually the big issue is towards the end of the season, pitch counts, guys just can't hold on to those as well. Usually it's a lack of training. And this is this big dichotomy that I see between youth baseball and then you get into like the low minors is there's this undertraining because they're so worried about fatiguing and hurting a guy that they go, well, let's just do less. And then you get into collegiate baseball where their issue is typically overtraining. Because it's like, hey, you're going to wake up at 4. We're going to do weights at 4:30. Oh, then you have like 7 hours of class. Then we're going to do practice. And then we're going to have you guys do study hall. And then you have a lab for chemistry class right after. Then you're going to get 3 hours of sleep and do it again. So there's this weird flip of everything. And that's why you see a lot of freshmen go into college baseball and they actually drop off because they haven't been prepared to handle that. So I think what you're doing with them is probably prepping a guy pretty well for college baseball. And to say whether it's right, whether it's wrong, you can say that about anything when it comes down to it. Because if you have a guy who is slow twitch and crappy endurance, maybe running is a really long distance running is a really good thing for him with some sprints sprinkled in or like interval type runs. But if you have a guy who's blazing fast, full fast twitch fibers, long distance running may make that guy worse. So you just kind of got to match things to where the guy is. And, I know it's not something we're talking about. We're talking about arm care, but my background is in biomechanics. That's like saying everyone needs to throw this one specific way. There's specific checkpoints, but you got to fit the drills to the guy's movement patterns.
I mean, if you come down to it, like when a scout looks at a player, they're saying, what's his body control like? That's literally it's just that one simple thing. How can you control your body? And if you are not strong, you're not going to be able to carry that weight for 40 games, 50 games, and being able to come back and recover. Like that's where the separating factor is what's your recovery time and how can you control your body weight?
Well, so we worked with a kid at Gonzaga this year. We got him on some of the arm care stuff. I don't know if I'm allowed to use names or not, so I won't. But he was, high end guy over at Gonzaga, upper 90s. He had some issues, so we kind of got him on track on how to use the arm care system, got him out of his shoulder pain. Obviously, they just got knocked out of a regional, but, had a fantastic year and really hoping he boosted that draft stock up. But for him, he was able to take that and he loved doing, mobility sticks, Mark Pro. He was doing all this stuff for recovery, but then he was able to kind of take each one and go, well, if this gives me my best opportunity to recover quicker and I can do it in 10 minutes as opposed to 30, I'm going to do the 10 minutes that gives me the best bang for my buck. Because when you're traveling and you have class and everything else going on, you really need to be in tune with your body and have that insight open up and go, yeah, this is what works for me. Not going on Instagram and going, well, I saw this one guy do it, so I must have to do that as well. Right. So by tracking your strength through the system, you're able to really understand, well, this gets me recovered by day 3. When I do all these things, I recover by day 4. If I do less and I focus what I'm doing less specifically for me, I recover faster. That's the best way to go about it. So you're able to really personalize and individualize what that training, recovery, day 1, day 2, day 3, whichever part of your system you're on, you can really specify that. And instead of hitting the bullseye 50% of the time, if you just increase that to 70%, that's a difference maker in a player's career.
Which is huge. And like the number one thing that I love about this app, and we've talked before on this, and in my background, I have a pretty decent background in pitching. I've been doing it for a long time. I've been lucky enough to, just like you, talk to some really high-end experts on, exactly how to schedule out pitchers, of when they throw, when they do their midweek stuff, what they do at day after, etc. But at the end of the day, I'm educated guessing. That is the best thing that I can do. I can ask a million questions to my players. How are you feeling? What did you do? When are you working out? How's your strength feeling here? How's your fatigue feeling here? But I'm educated guessing. And then based on the information I get back as a coach, I can then kind of try to program you out. But you said it right there. I'm hitting the bullseye maybe 50, 60% of the time. And that's a guy like myself that I'm not trying to toot my own horn, but I have some decent background in this. A lot of the people who are working with youth athletes don't have that knowledge that me and you and Spiker have acquired. So this app and the questions that the app asks, and kind of the way it then shoots out what you're supposed to do that day based on the feedback the player gives it, what it really does to me is it helps the coach. It really gives the coach, like, think about it this way. You can, as a coach, you can implement this app with your players, and you can basically gain 25 years of industry experience like that on what to do, which is what I love.
It is awesome. And, we talked about hitting that bullseye. And it doesn't matter what program you do. And this is something I learned. My first year, when I went back, I was coaching at Vanguard. We didn't have a strength coach. We didn't have an AT. They've obviously changed quite a bit to where it's like, hey, you're all those roles, plus you have to recruit, and you have to learn how to cut grass. So, and by the way, here's 20 pitchers you got to go develop to make a better program. So you have to do everything. You wear a bunch of hats. In my first year, it was just like, here's a blanket program. Man, with 50% of the guys, it was like, I'm killing it with this 50% of the guys. About 25% of them were so tired, they couldn't even get up out of bed the next day. The other 25%, it was like, I'm just not pushing those guys hard enough. So then the next year, I flip it, and then all of a sudden my 25% that were undertrained, I'm way overtraining them. It's like I'm trying to dial this in. And then once I started kind of realizing I have to individualize, if you really want to push the boundaries of development and get these guys doing what they need to be, you need to start individualizing. There's still the basis of that generalized program, but then you need to start adding in this for this guy, taking this out of that general program for that guy. And that's what the arm care system lets you do. Is if you're hitting the bullseye 50% of the time, you're probably a really good coach. Go look at the amount of guys that actually get to the big leagues. Go look at the amount of players that actually get to college baseball. It is way under 50%. So if you're improving 50% of your players just on, gut feel and doing all those things, you're doing a pretty good job when it comes down. That's just the numbers. But if you can increase that even by 5%, and if you are, a college coach, a high school coach, a travel ball coach, coaching in the minor leagues, whatever it may be, and if you can increase your return on investment by 5%, that's huge. So no one's going to be upset if they can increase their stock portfolio by 5%. And that's right. Really all player development is you're managing your portfolio and understanding, well, how can I get an extra 0.5% out of player A? Man, I got to get 5% out of player B. This guy right here, yeah, I'd love him to stay the same, but let's get him a little better if we can. And we know that strength is never going to be a bad solution when it comes down to it. We talked a little bit earlier, jumping backwards on, body control, athleticism. There's a ton of great research studies out there. Now they're calling it lumbopelvic control. It's just core stability. And all that it is your ability to control your pelvis underneath your shoulders. And that all comes down to strength. If your pelvis from your pelvic girdle all the way up through your shoulders is good and strong, you're going to be pretty athletic. And that's a ton of what the arm care system is going to focus on. And the only difference is if you have internal rotation strength issues, it's going to balance you out a little more front side. If you have scaption issues, it's going to give you a little more straight lever work. So whatever that system is, it's going to help you maximize and balance that body out so you're not getting too much torque one way or the other.
Are you of the belief that there's a number of bullets in an arm, or are you of the belief that I can throw as much as I want?
I think you can throw nearly as much as you want if you're physically capable and ready to handle it. So, and this is what I'm going back to is when I got brought into the Angels, one of my big things was to pick the deliveries that projected velocity. And we did it. We found guys that projected velo really well. We just got them stronger. They threw harder. But with that, if you throw harder, for whether you're, per mile an hour, let's say a guy is, 5 Newton meters per mile an hour on him. Another guy might be 2.5, whatever that may be. For every 1 mile an hour you increase, you're going to increase that by whatever your standard is. And that varies from individual to individual. But if you go from 90 to 91, and that is average of 5 Newton meters per mile an hour on you, you're going to be now 5 extra Newton meters. So you need to have the strength to handle that velocity. And I think that's why you see guys, even Jamie Moyer blew out. Jamie Moyer needed a Tommy John surgery. So it doesn't matter what it is. It's just like if you're driving on tires and you don't change your tires and rotate and do all those things, you're going to lessen the life of those tires. So there is a limited number of bullets if you aren't maintaining your fatigue levels, if you're not maintaining your strength, if you're not making sure that you are as strong as you possibly can be. But you can add to that, munitions depot in the sense by making sure physically you're as robust as you can possibly be. Big players beat little players. That's what it comes down to. Jose Altuve will be durable from a shoulder standpoint purely because he's taking care of himself physically. That's just the way it is. You have guys, Roy Oswalt was not a big player, but he took care of himself physically. Most people listening probably don't even know who Roy Oswalt is, sadly. But, guys that take care of themselves physically will play longer. They will be more durable. They will recover quicker. And I know I'm getting long-winded again, and I apologize, but I look at the arm like a bridge. If all you're doing is tracking the cars going over the bridge with pitch counts, you don't know how strong the bridge is. If internal rotation is the north side, external is the south, scaption and grip are all the scaffolding and everything that holds bridges up. Again, I'm not an engineer, but whatever all those little bars are underneath the bridge, if something on that's weak, it doesn't matter how many cars you drive over, it's going to break. But if that bridge is strong enough to handle it, it's going to be able to take more cars over it. So that's my whole thing is we need to make sure the structure is sound enough because your first line of defense is going to be your muscle. Your second line is your connective tissue. And then your third, it's bone. And that's why when you see younger kids, they have, what do they call avulsion fractures where that whole bone rips off the elbow. I've seen guys that we've looked at in the draft room that have thrown and just their arm breaks in half on throws because the bone is just not developed. But if we make sure the muscle is strong enough, then the connective tissue is not going to take as much force. If the muscles are protecting the connective tissues can then protect the bone. So it's this big, long, one thing connected to the other. And I may not have explained that perfectly well, but that's the general gist of it. Again, I'm a pitching coach that knows enough to be dangerous on anatomy. So
I first off, before you go, I'm going to steal that. All right. That bridge has now been stolen for sure. That story. That's amazing.
So what do you say to, I'm just give you a scenario. I'm really interested to hear your thoughts. A player comes up to you 2 days after a start. He's thrown 60 pitches. He's not necessarily a guy that blows the doors open on the strength side. So he probably could do 20 push-ups in a row. If he could, 20 push-ups in a row. But Yeah, but but throws 86, 87. And he comes up to you and says, "Hey, I got 3 innings in me today." Would you say, "Yeah, we could probably do that," or would you be, "I don't know about that"?
So I have that exact use case in examples with the system at the major league level as well as at the amateur level. So at the major league level, what we would do is we would test our relievers after they pitched. And, I don't know your guys' background, how long you played baseball or anything like that, but I know that I've never once told someone that I couldn't pitch that day. And I was a reliever, and I sucked. So I didn't have a choice to say that I wasn't able to pitch. And the worse you are, the more you need to be willing to pitch, because that's just how you keep yourself going.
I just want to get in, coach.
Yeah, exactly. They're like, "Hey, Jordan, can you go today?" "Oh, of course I can. I'm good." And then as soon as that coach leaves, I go, "Man, I'm freaking hanging." And that's the way that it is at every level. There's no player that's going to tell you, "I'm down today. You can't use me." And it's usually the guy that's like, he just had a bad outing or whatever it may be, and he'll come over, "Hey, Skip, I'm ready to go. I got 3 in me today." It's like, yeah, okay, that's great. But, that's the backstory of it. But we would actually test our relievers after they threw and find out where are you day one. We had a reliever throw 18 out of 21 games at the major league level when we were in a pennant chase at one point in 2020, purely because we knew he was recovered. The news media is writing up, "Why aren't they using this player? Why aren't they using that player?" Those guys aren't recovered. We were dealing with the COVID season. Guys weren't bounced back. We had like 2 relievers that came in physically ready to go. And by strength testing them, we knew this guy's good to get out there. And it wasn't just like, "Hey, we're going to throw you for a third of an inning here, 1/3 of an inning here, come get a hitter there." It was like 2 1/3, 1 1/3, 1 inning, day off, up in the bullpen, face 2 hitters, and because he was strong enough, we were able to not have to ask guys, "Are you good to go?" Another use case, I had a player who was, he was in the NL Central. He'd been in the big leagues with a couple teams already. And he was not on the 40-man at this time. And because of the COVID rules, he gives me a phone call and he says, "Hey, I just pitched yesterday," and it's now Saturday morning. He calls me, he goes, "I just pitched yesterday. My organization's rule is for me to get back on the 40-man, I have to go back-to-back days." He goes, "I just threw like 37 pitches yesterday." He's like, I'm crispy. So we'll get a strength test in. Get a strength test, text me your numbers. Does a strength test, he's normal. And that's where I go back to the whole phrase, dude, you got to learn to go to work with a headache. You might be a little bit, fatigued, a little bit quote unquote sore, but your strength is fine. Warm up a little longer. So he warms up a little bit longer, goes out there that night. He throws like, 2/3 of an inning and 18 pitches, something like that. He's in the big leagues less than 48 hours later. So by understanding where his strength is at, he's able to go in there with the confidence. But if his strength is down, it's not worth it at any level of play to go, "Yeah, I'm ready to go." So he's able to take that information and go, "Okay, here's where it is I'm at. Now I'm able to get back into that game and make sure that I'm getting back onto that big league roster." Because at that level of play, that's a 6-figure decision. On the low end, it's a 6-figure decision. And the other thing I like to say with that, taking that into the amateur side of it now, something that was recent was I highly disagree with high school pitch counts. I think they're the stupidest thing in the world because it tells me if I have a guy go 1 through 35 pitches, he can pitch tomorrow. If you did that in pro ball, you'd be fired on the spot. If you threw a guy back-to-back days in pro ball without express written consent of MLB, the commissioner, the GM, the owner, the assistant GM, the pitching coordinator, like the whole list of guys, everyone has to turn their key. You get fired instantly. But with an amateur who's still growing, whose bridge is not strong, oh yeah, back-to-back days, that's fine. He threw less than 35 pitches. It matters on how they recover. So I had a guy, he was also a shortstop for me. He threw 17 or 19 pitches on a Tuesday. And on Wednesday, he comes up to me and he goes, "Hey, I'm good to go." I said, "Well, you're not really on my card. I don't like going back-to-back with guys." So he goes, "No, I feel great. I feel great." So then I give him a strength test. He's fatigued. So then all of a sudden it's like, is it really a benefit for me to put you at shortstop as well? So I switch him over to first base, and I have to push my second baseman to short and my original first baseman over to second. And then it's like, hey, look, you're down until your strength is back up, and I'm going to limit your throws greatly. So by him coming up to me and saying, "Hey, I feel really good," and he did, he felt great. But just because you feel good doesn't mean you're recovered. Feel versus real. And that's where you're able to take that, subjective input from the player and line that up with objective data to make an informed decision. And now I just hit the bullseye 85% of the time with that player as opposed to 50.
You know what I love about that? My favorite thing about that story is, again, as coaches, we always want to try to do the best thing. But we also, like, a lot of times when we've talked on this podcast about this, a lot of times those players are going to tug at your heartstrings, right? They're going to say, hey, coach, I'm ready to go, man.
This kid was a senior. He may never be able to play again after this. And it's like, I want to give this guy the opportunity. But I also, let's say he doesn't get to play anymore. I also don't want him to miss 8 to 12 months of getting into the workforce because he has a surgery.
Right. Well, and specifically, on our end, we work with a lot of like younger teams, right? So you hear this story all the time where a pitcher started game one of a tournament and then the team starts to make it through. And let's say he throws 80 pitches game one, and then that's on a Friday. And then all of a sudden on a Sunday, they're all out of pitching and they're in the 6th game of the weekend. And he goes, hey, coach, I'm going to go get that championship for you. Let me go. And then the coach is like, what do I do? Like, I want to help the player. Obviously, I want to give him a great experience. I don't want to get him hurt. But, like, what do I do? Well, with this, again, this type of when you make it scientific, you cut emotion out of it.
Well, sometimes it's not even the players. It's the parents.
It's the parents. It's
they'll
everybody.
Go to the kid and be like, hey, you ready? And the kid's like, yeah, I'm ready. And not knowing
and that happens
that
at every level.
Yeah, like the fans get involved and they're like, you can pitch this. Like it's not the World Series. You're not Chris Carpenter.
Right.
Like you're not going to get a bonus for winning the World Series.
Right.
You get a plastic trophy, right? So it's funny how that all works out. Just really funny.
Yeah, I always ask parents, I have a couple kids that I do lessons with, they're in the travel age range. Some of them are 14, going to be coming into high school here pretty soon. And they go, man, my kid started on the Friday game. He's ready to get back out there and pitch on Sunday. And I said, oh, really? It's like that's that big of a tournament. There's a lot of national publicity. They go, oh yeah, we're in whatever city it is they're in that no one's ever heard of, and there's like 6 teams in it. And I asked him, who won that tournament last year? Well, I don't know. Said then it must not be that important, so he probably doesn't need a pitch. He had his good outing. What did he learn? Maybe he can play a position, but if he's not recovered, what's the point? No one remembers what happened 12 months ago in that tournament anyways. So let's make the decision that's best for the individual's long-term development. Kid's 14. We're going to be okay. When he's playing in the World Series, and there's literally on the line of whether you're winning or losing, people's ability to feed their family. Not just for that, 40-man roster. It's for that 40-man roster. The minor league coaches, the minor league players, the Dominican coaching staff is all based on how that major league team is performing. There's thousands of people that livelihoods depend on them winning the World Series. That's a different story. No one's paying attention to what happened on the, firecracker tournament July 4th through 7th,
Mm-hmm. So I want to switch this to our TikTok, and I'm going to give you the 7 things that for the recovering faster, and you tell me if I'm full of it or not. All right. So this got 150,000 views. Number 1 is drink more water, 100 ounces to 120 ounces a day. The second thing is fuel up immediately afterwards, protein shake especially. 3, ice and reduce inflammation, 10 on, 10 off. 4, active recovery the next day, so 40 to 45 minutes of walking or running. External mobility work, bands, stretches. Number 6 is foam roll. And then 7 is get good quality sleep, 7 to 9 hours at night.
I would agree with everything except ice.
And that was the big thing that everyone disagreed with. It was, well, they didn't. Not everyone disagreed with it. It was everyone was arguing with each other whether ice on or ice off. And my thought was, well, why do we have ice baths? Why do we have athletes that do ice baths? Why do we have those sleeves that go around? What are those sleeves that go around the legs? I can't remember, but a lot of MMA fighters do it too.
Yeah.
So what's your reasoning for the ice?
So rest ice compression elevation, that's designed for blunt force trauma. So Ryan knows everybody in the medical world, like everybody. And he actually talked to the guy who developed rice. And I'm I'm going to paraphrase it. He said it's probably the worst thing that he's done for athletics is come up with rice because it's like, it's not what it's designed for. That's like putting, oh, well, it's oil, cooking oil. I'm going to use that to put into my car. It's like, well, they're both oils, but they have very different uses. If you just got hit with a pitch or a comebacker, ice is fantastic. But when it comes to recovering a muscle, not recovering a blunt force trauma injury or a sprain, something that's traumatic, you need to get blood and oxygen to that. So that's where you need to increase flow. You need to get those, all the little organs and everything that can pump out all that crap. You need to get it pumping. Capillaries. Yeah, there we go. You need to get blood, oxygen, capillaries, everything firing to pump that out. But when you put ice on there, it pushes everything, it constricts. It doesn't allow actual blood flow to get in. So you're not pushing things out, you're actually keeping it in there. One thing I will say is there's a ton of good research out there, is if you take your non-throwing hand and you soak that in ice between innings, it actually cools the blood that's pumping through your system, and it does increase your endurance. So Stanford football started it by cooling their non-throwing or their non-dominant hands for like linemen or defensive backs, something like that. And we kind of took that and started messing with it during my time with the NPA. And we had an actual ultrasonic, whatever they are, tracking the actual blood flow and everything with that. And it actually increased blood flow because you're cooling something that's further away. So it's cooling that blood supply or something along those lines and helping you recover quicker. And it gives you more to get in there. So it's one of the things that I implemented when I was coaching in college is we would actually have our guys, we had a cooler, like a little bucket with ice in it, and they'd put their non-dominant hand in there. And when we started doing it, we actually, and again, there's research behind it that showed our guys could pitch longer in games before they started losing command and control. So everything else on that list, you go into the Arm Care app, if it gives you a recovery day, it's going to tell you to eat, it's going to tell you to hydrate, it's going to tell you to sleep. It's also going to tell you to do your post-throw training, which is our bands, mobility, stability. It's going to give you some foam roller work in there. We're big on getting that heart rate elevated. And again, we talked about it earlier. Get the heart rate to the point where you are going to be close to like puking. We want to see blue rings that gives you the right hormones, all the nutrients that your muscles and your ligaments need to recover. That's my only qualm is icing. And it's something that I don't let my guys to do it.
Would you sub something out there?
Some guys really love compression. But again, with the Arm Care system, we've had guys track compression with like the Normatex. Some guys, it's fantastic. Other guys, it doesn't do anything for them. Some guys, the Mark Pro, Compex, I like Compex just because it's a little bit more affordable most of the time. But some guys, the Compex is fantastic for getting that strength back up in those specific areas. Some guys, it doesn't do anything. So for me, if I was going to substitute anything, it would probably be a Compex or a Mark Pro, something that's going to be that like rhythmic, kind of helps those little capillaries and everything pump and get rid of that stuff.
So would you have them run pulls at the end of their start, though? I always thought that was stupid, but you tell me.
I have my guys, when the time is available to do, I call them intervals, interval sprints, and it'll be about an 8 to 10 minute sprint work with hard sprint, hard walk, hard sprint, hard walk around the baseball field because, again, I'm looking for that hormone release. To really,
but I'm talking about like immediately after. So like
as soon as
they get off the field, 7 innings, and then you're like, all right, time to go run.
Yep.
Oh, you would do that.
Ask anybody who's pitched for me at the collegiate level when I'm in charge of that stuff. They're like, this freaking sucks. But then in the postseason, they're like, man, I'm still throwing 95, 100 pitches, 110 pitches because we're taking care of that stuff. And opposing managers hated it because it's like, hey, we're done. Why aren't you guys on the bus? Well, we're running sprints. And the position players hated it until we started winning all of our games 3-2. And they realized, man, we better pay attention to what these guys are doing. And then some of the position players start doing it. But as soon as you can, after you finish that game, a lot of times in pro ball setting, they're going to go in, they're going to lift directly after. They're going to do their sprint work inside on the treadmills, everything like that directly after. So from a research standpoint and what that does, the sooner you can do it to finishing competition, the better.
Okay, so just to recap, so I know there's probably people can you repeat all that? So the first thing to do after a start, they do their interval running immediately afterwards. Get their 7 to 9 hours of sleep. Make sure they get protein in them right after the start. Make sure they get that water intake that day. And then the next day, do another workout to get that blood flowing again. Do their mobility, do their stretches, get another protein shake, get another 100 ounces of water, and then get another 7 to 9 hours of sleep.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, sleep is something you can never replace. And when it comes to water, I tell guys if you weigh 200 pounds, you need to drink 200 ounces of water. 1 ounce of water for every pound of body weight you have. My general rule of thumb is if you want to compete at the highest level, you're probably looking at about 6,000 or more good calories every day. And most of the time, your high school athletes, your younger athletes, they go, I ate breakfast this morning, and then I skipped lunch, and then I had a Pop-Tart for dinner. Well, that sucks. It's like buying a Ferrari and throwing, just regular
unleaded gas. Yeah.
Yeah, you have to take care of it. If you want to perform at a high level, it's so much information. And a lot of times guys just basically aren't eating enough. They're not drinking enough water. And that's one of the other things too, is we implemented this in Pro Ball, was we were using urine specific, gravity testing, USG testing, and it tells you whether the guy's hydrated or not. Almost 100% of the time, if there was any type of soft tissue injury, the player was not hydrated. They just didn't drink enough water. And when we hammered out hydration, no more hamstring strains, no more groin issues, no more low back issues, just by hydrating. And then the second piece, you better be freaking eating. And again, I know I'm going on a rant, but those are the two that are just controllable. No matter how much,
it's
money
eating the right food.
You can drink water.
Yeah, it's eating the right food. It's not eating fast food. I mean, I really want to do a piece on if you do get in a situation where fast food is the only choice, what could you eat? But being able to pound the protein, like your example on water, 1 ounce of water for every body weight, for every pound. The same applies to protein. Like you have to get that protein in you. You cannot neglect that. And I think a lot of athletes, they're wondering like, well, I'm just skin and bones. Like, yeah, because you're not eating protein, bro. You're eating carbs and you're eating fats. That's why.
and this is, it's a big positive of living in a country that has the resources that we do, and being able to travel to different countries through baseball. You literally see that other groups just have nothing when it comes down to it. So it's something that people need to be very appreciative of, is how easy we do have it here. But also with that comes the negative side of it, where we're eating toaster strudels and Pop-Tarts, and we think that a gallon of syrup is what you're supposed to put on breakfast. When you're done playing, do whatever you want. But if you're really trying to make a career out of this and make the most of your time, you really need to hammer out, good protein bases, smart fats, carbohydrates that are positive. And now my dog's going crazy in the background, but you really need to hammer out good nutrition when it comes down to it.
Yeah.
Jordan, this has been a great conversation. Can you go ahead and plug in the stuff for Arm Care? I know you have a sign in the background. If anyone's watching this podcast, if you're listening to it, it says armcare.com, so you can visit there. But go ahead and give in your plugins, and we'll also put these in the show notes.
Yeah, for sure. And like we said, we're starting a partnership up with you guys as well. So it's obvious you can find it directly through any of your coaches. I'm sure they're going to be able to point those players in the right direction. But if you go to Instagram, it's More Than Velocity. That's our YouTube as well. We have More Than Velocity podcasts. Again, my dog's trying to help us out there if you guys can hear him. And then we also have just armcare.com, where you can get on there. We have some testimonials, some great videos, and everything going on with that.
That's awesome, man. There's at least 3 things. I'm probably going to bring a bucket of ice into the dugout this weekend. Left hand in it for the right-handed pitchers. Okay, we're bumping pitch counts, boys. Left hand in.
Would you dunk their whole arm? Would you dunk in their whole arm or just their hand?
Just the hand. It's plenty. You don't have to overdo it. Just the non-throwing hand.
We're doing that, and then interval sprints after. Let's go.
Perfect, man. Perfect. Well, I'm looking forward to future conversations with you, Jordan. Hopefully we can meet in person at some point. But again, thank you for your time. I know you're busy. Guys, please subscribe to the YouTube channel. Also, you can subscribe to this podcast. 5 stars preferably on Apple Podcasts. You can follow us on Spotify as well. You can also now rate the show on Spotify, and you can also watch the show on Spotify. So a lot of cool things that are happening in that space, and we will catch you in the next episode. Thanks.